She gave away the only thing keeping her warm, thinking she'd never see it again. She was wrong. It was 20 degrees below zero in Chicago. Sarah, a struggling waitress with $3 in her bank account, saw a little girl shivering alone on a street corner. Without hesitation, she took off her own expensive wool coat, the only luxury she owned, and wrapped it around the child. She didn't know that child was the silent, grieving daughter of Davies Moretti, the city's most feared Mafia don. When Davies finds the woman who saved his daughter, he doesn't just want to say thank you. He wants to own her. But in a world of blood and bullets, kindness is a dangerous weakness. The wind off Lake Michigan didn't just blow. It bit. It tore through layers of clothing like razor blades, finding every patch of exposed skin and turning it raw. Sarah Jenkins adjusted her name tag, shivering as a draft snaked its way through the cracked window of the Rusty Spoon. It was a dive diner on the edge of the South Loop, the kind of place where the coffee was strong. The eggs were greasy, and the customers usually wanted to be left alone. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The diner was empty, save for old man Henderson, nursing a black coffee in the corner booth. "You should head home, Sarah." Her manager, distinctively unpleasant man, named Gary, grunted from the kitchen window. "Forecast says the blizzard is picking up. I'm closing early." "Thanks, Gary," Sarah said, untying her apron. She was relieved. She was exhausted. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out sneakers, but there was a pit in her stomach. Closing early meant losing the last hour of hourly wage, plus any potential tips. When you had exactly $14.50 to your name until Friday, every dime mattered. Sarah went to the back room and pulled on her coat. It was the one nice thing she owned. A heavy camel-colored wool trench coat she had found at a high-end consignment shop 3 years ago. It had cost her a week's wages, but it made her feel dignified. It made her feel like she wasn't just a waitress scraping by. She was a woman with a future. She wrapped the scarf tight, pushed open the heavy glass door, and stepped out into the white abyss. The snow was coming down in thick, heavy sheets. Visibility was less than 10 feet. Sarah tucked her chin into her collar and began the trek to the bus stop. That's when she saw her. At first, Sarah thought it was a trick of the streetlights, but there, standing near the mouth of the alleyway, between a pawn shop and a liquor store, was a silhouette. Small, fragile. Sarah squinted against the wind. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was wearing a red velvet dress, something expensive, something meant for a holiday party, but she had no coat, no hat, no gloves. She was just standing there, clutching a small stuffed rabbit, shaking so violently that Sarah could see the tremors from 20 feet away. "Hey!" Sarah yelled, the wind snatching her voice away. She ran over her boots, slipping on the black ice. When she reached the girl, Sarah's heart broke. The child's lips were turning a terrifying shade of blue. Her eyes were wide, dark, and vacant, staring at nothing. "Sweetheart, where are your parents?" Sarah asked, dropping to her knees in the snow. The girl didn't answer. She didn't even blink. The cold had moved past pain and into the dangerous zone of numbness. Okay, you're freezing," Sarah panicked. Without a second thought, Sarah unbuttoned her trench coat. The biting wind instantly assaulted her thin uniform, piercing her ribs, but she didn't care. She stripped the coat off and draped it over the little girl. It was massive on the child, trailing on the dirty slush, but it was warm. Sarah buttoned it up to the girl's chin. "Is that better?" The girl looked up. For a split second, something flickered in those dark eyes. recognition, gratitude, fear. I'm going to run into that store and get help. Okay, stay right here. Do not move, Sarah commanded gently. She stood up, shivering violently now, her teeth chattering. She ran toward the liquor store, 3 doors down, the only place with lights on. She shoved the door open, the bell jingling. "Call 911!" she screamed at the clerk. "There's a freezing child outside." The clerk, a bored teenager, reached for the phone. Sarah spun around to point out the girl through the window, but the corner was empty. Sarah ran back outside, ignoring the cold. "Hey, little girl." She ran to the alley. Nothing. Just fresh snow covering the sidewalk. There were no footprints leading away. The snow was falling too fast, erasing everything instantly. The girl and Sarah's coat were gone. Sarah stood there for 5 minutes, screaming into the storm, until her own skin began to burn with frostbite. Defeated, crying and freezing to death, she had to run the 3 blocks to the bus station in just her thin waitress uniform. She rode the bus home, shivering, convinced she had just hallucinated the whole thing, mourning the loss of the only object that made her feel safe. 2 days later, the temperature that had dropped even further. Sarah was back at the Rusty Spoon. She had caught a nasty cold from her exposure to the elements. She sniffled as she wiped down the counter, her nose red and raw. "You look like hell, Jenkins," Gary muttered, passing by with a tray of dirty dishes. "Thanks, Gary. You're a ray of sunshine," she rasped. The lunch rush was over. The diner was quiet. Then the atmosphere changed. It wasn't a sound, it was a pressure. The air in the room seemed to get heavier. The conversation at the 2 occupied booths died out instantly. The front door opened. It didn't jingle. It was opened with purpose. 2 men walked in first. They were huge, linebacker huge. They wore black suits that cost more than the diner itself. They didn't sit. They stood by the door, scanning the room, their hands clasped loosely in front of them in a way that screamed concealed weapon. Then the 3rd man entered. He was tall, over 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out a charcoal grey overcoat. He had hair the colour of midnight and eyes that looked like shattered ice. A jagged, thin scar ran through his left eyebrow, marring an otherwise perfect aristocratic face. This was Davies Nico Moretti. Sarah didn't know his name, but she knew his type. Chicago was full of men who thought they owned the world. But this man, he looked like he actually did. He walked straight to the counter. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at Sarah. His gaze was intense, dissecting her. He looked at her worn-out sneakers, her frayed apron, her red nose. Can I help you, sir?" Sarah stammered. Her throat felt tight. The man didn't speak. He lifted a finger, and one of the giants by the door walked over. The giant was holding something folded over his arm. He placed it gently on the counter. Sarah gasped. It was her camel coat, but it had been dry cleaned. It looked brand new, and pinned to the lapel was a diamond brooch that probably cost $10,000. "Is this yours?" the man asked. His voice was deep, a baritone that vibrated in her chest. It was the voice of a man who was used to absolute obedience. Yes," Sarah whispered. She reached out to touch the wool, confirming it was real. "Where did you find it?" "The little girl, Bella," the man said. The ice in his eyes thawed just a fraction. "Her name is Bella. She is my daughter." Sarah's eyes widened. Is she okay? I went to get help and she vanished. My security team located her seconds after you entered the store, Davies said. She had wandered off from her nanny at a gala nearby. She has a habit of hiding. He leaned in closer. The smell of expensive cologne, sandalwood, and tobacco wafted over the smell of frying grease. Bella has not spoken a word in 2 years, Davies said, his voice lowering. Not since her mother died. But when I found her wrapped in this coat, she looked at me and said one word. Sarah held her breath. What did she say? Warm. Davies stared at Sarah. You gave your coat to a stranger in a blizzard. My men told me you ran to the bus stop in nothing but that uniform. You could have died. She was a child, Sarah said, shrugging as if it were obvious. She was cold. I'm an adult. I can handle it. Davies studied her. He looked at the name tag, Sarah. You saved the life of the daughter of Davies Moretti, he stated. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Every local in Chicago knew the name Moretti. They ran the unions, the shipping yards, and half the politicians. They were the reason bodies washed up in the Chicago River. I didn't know who she was, Sarah said, quickly terrified. I don't want any trouble. You have the opposite of trouble, Sarah, Davies said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote something down with a gold fountain pen, tore it out, and slid it across the counter. Sarah looked at it. It was a check for $50,000. For the coat, Davies said, and for the warmth. Sarah stared at the check. It was more money than she made in 2 years. It could pay off her debts. It could fix her life. But something about it felt transactional, dirty, like he was buying her kindness. Sarah picked up the check. She looked Davies in the eye, and then she tore it in half. The diner went dead silent. The 2 bodyguards tensed up, hands reaching into their jackets. Davies didn't flinch. He just raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. I didn't do it for money. Sarah said, her voice shaking, but her chin held high. I did it because she was a freezing child. You don't pay for kindness, Mr. Moretti. That cheapens it. She pushed the torn check back to him. Take the coat. Keep the brooch. Just make sure she never gets that cold again. Davies stared at the torn paper. Then he looked at Sarah. For the first time, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. He wasn't angry. He was fascinated. You have pride, he murmured. I like that. I have work, Sarah corrected. Please, sir, if you're not at ordering food, I have tables to bus. Davies stood up straight. He signaled at his men. We will see each other again, Sarah Jenkins, he said. He turned and walked out. As the black SUVs peeled away from the curb, Gary, the manager, stormed out of the kitchen. Are you insane? Gary screamed, his face purple. That was Nico Moretti. You just disrespected the head of the Chicago Mafia in my diner. I just returned his money, Gary, Sarah said, exhausted. You're fired, Gary spat. Sarah froze. What? I don't want heat from the Morettis. I don't want his guys coming back here thinking you work for me. Get your stuff and get out. Now. Sarah stood there, stunned. She had done the right thing twice. She had saved a child, and she had kept her integrity. And her reward was losing her job in the dead of winter. 3 days passed. Sarah had applied to 5 restaurants, but nobody was hiring until after the new year. Her rent was due in 48 hours. She was sitting in her tiny, drafty studio apartment, wrapped in a blanket, eating instant noodles. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Ms. Jenkins, please look out your window. The voice was unmistakable. Baritone, smooth, dangerous. Sarah dropped her fork. She walked to the window and peered through the blinds. Parked directly in front of her crumbling apartment building was a fleet of 3 black Mercedes G-Wagons. They looked like tanks sitting on the residential street. "What do you want?" Sarah whispered into the phone. "I heard about your employment situation," Davies said. "It seems my presence at your workplace caused complications." "You could say that," Sarah snapped. "I got fired because of you." "I know. I own the building the Rusty Spoon is in. I evicted the diner this morning. Gary is currently looking for a new job as well." Sarah gasped. You closed the whole diner. Gary has kids." "He insulted the woman who saved my daughter. He is lucky I only took his business," Davies said coldly. "Now come downstairs. I have a job interview for you." "I'm not working for the mob, Mr. Moretti." "It is not for the mob. It is for Bella." Sarah paused. She thought of the little girl's sad, dark eyes. "5 minutes," Davies said, "or I come up." Sarah threw on a sweater and jeans. She marched downstairs, determined to tell him off. Davies was leaning against the hood of the middle SUV. He was wearing a casual black turtleneck and a long wool coat. He looked like a model for a GQ shoot on Villainy. "I'm not a criminal," Sarah said as she approached him. "I can't be part of your world." "I need a nanny," Davies said bluntly. "A live-in companion for Bella. Since the incident in the snow, she refuses to wear any coat other than yours. She sleeps with it. She carries it around the house." He took a step closer to Sarah. The heat coming off him was palpable. "My daughter is surrounded by guards, hitmen and sycophants. She has no mother. She has no softness in her life. Until you." "I'm a waitress, not a nanny," Sarah argued weakly. "You are patient, you are brave, and you are the only person Bella has responded to in years," Davies countered. He pulled a document from his pocket. "The contract. Live in at my estate in Lake Forest. You will have your own suite. You will be safe. Your debt will be paid." "And the salary?" Sarah asked, hating that she even considered it. $10,000 a week. Sarah choked on the cold air. That's insane." "Hazard's pay," Davies said, his eyes darkening. "My world is dangerous, Sarah. I won't lie to you. If you come with me, you are under my protection, but you are also a target. Lorenzo, my underboss, is making moves. He thinks I am weak because I grieve for my wife. He thinks Bella is a liability." He stepped closer, towering over her. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His gloved finger grazed her cheek, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her toes. "I need someone inside the house I can trust. Someone who isn't on the payroll for muscle. Bella chose you, and my daughter has excellent instincts." Sarah looked at the contract. Then she looked at the run-down building behind her, where the heat didn't work. Then she looked at Davies. It was crazy. It was dangerous. It was literally sleeping with the enemy. But she remembered the little girl in the snow. "I have conditions," Sarah said. Davies smirked. "I expected nothing less. Name them." "I'm not your mistress. I'm her nanny. Strictly professional. And I get weekends off to visit my mum in the nursing home." "Done," Davies said. He opened the car door for her. "Get in, Sarah. Winter is coming and I intend to keep you very warm." As Sarah slid into the leather interior of the G-Wagon, she noticed the driver checking the rearview mirror nervously. She didn't see the black sedan parked down the street, headlights off, watching them. She didn't know that by getting into this car, She had just placed a bullseye on her back. Lorenzo was watching, and Lorenzo didn't like loose ends. The Moretti estate in Lake Forest wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as a French chateau. High iron gates, cameras, swiveling in the trees, and men with earpieces patrolling the perimeter. For the first week, Sarah felt like an intruder in a museum. The floors were marble, the ceilings were painted with frescoes, and the silence was deafening. Her suite was larger than her entire previous apartment. It had a balcony overlooking the frozen lake, a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, and a walk-in closet filled with clothes in her size. Davies hadn't just hired her. He had curated her. It was a terrifying level of attention to detail. But Sarah focused on Bella. The little girl was a ghost in her own home. She spent her days in the library, sitting in a large leather armchair, wrapped in Sarah's old camel coat. It was the only splash of imperfection in the pristine house-faded wool against polished mahogany. "Bella," Sarah said softly on a Thursday afternoon. She was holding a tray. "I made hot chocolate, not the fancy kind the chef makes with the dark chocolate shavings, the real kind, with marshmallows." Bella looked up. She didn't speak, but her nose twitched. Sarah sat on the floor, not the chair. She leveled herself with the child. "I used to drink this when I was sad. It warms you from the inside out." Bella hesitated, then slid off the chair. She sat on the rug next to Sarah and took the mug with 2 small hands. She took a sip. For the first time, the corner of her mouth lifted. From the doorway, Davies watched. He had been standing there for 10 minutes unnoticed. He was used to women who tried too hard, women who bought Bella expensive toys or tried to force her to speak. Sarah just sat on the floor. Davies loosened his tie. He had spent the morning dealing with a union strike at the docks and a shipment of firearms that had been intercepted by the feds. His head was pounding, but seeing Sarah in his library, bathed in the winter light, quieted the noise in his mind. He walked in. Sarah jumped, spilling a drop of cocoa on the rug. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Moretti." "I'll clean it up," she scrambled. "Leave it." Davies said, his voice rough. He walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a scotch. "And stop calling me Mr. Moretti. It makes me feel like my father. Call me Davies." "Okay." "Davies." Sarah said the name, feeling heavy on her tongue. He sat in the chair Bella had vacated. "You're making progress. She hasn't eaten lunch in the library in months." "She's lonely," Sarah said boldly. "This house, it's beautiful, Davies, but it's cold. There's no noise, no music, just guards and silence." Davies swirled his drink. "Safety requires silence. Noise covers the sound of footsteps. Is that how you want her to grow up? Safe but empty?" Davies's eyes snapped to hers. They were ice blue piercing. "You have strong opinions for an employee. I thought you hired me for my instincts," Sarah challenged him. Davies stared at her for a long moment. Then he let out a short, dry laugh. "Touché." He looked at Bella, who was now dipping a marshmallow into her mug. "My wife, Isabella's mother. She was the noise. She played the piano. She laughed loud enough to shake the crystal. When she died, the music stopped." "What happened to her?" Sarah asked, her voice a whisper. She knew she was crossing a line, but she couldn't stop herself. Davies's face hardened. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the mask of the Don. "A car bomb. Meant for me. She took the car that morning to go to a charity event." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, God. Lorenzo, my current underboss, swore it was a rival family. We went to war. We wiped them out. But sometimes... Davies looked into his glass. Sometimes I wonder if the call came from inside the house. He stood up abruptly. Dinner is at 7. Wear something nice. I have associates coming over. I want them to see Bella is being cared for. Is that all this is? Sarah asked, standing up. A show for your associates. Davies walked to the door, then stopped. He turned back, his gaze raking over her body in a way that made Sarah's breath hitch. If it were just a show, Sarah, I would have hired an actress. I hired you because you are the only real thing I've seen in 10 years. He left. Sarah stood there, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked down at Bella, who was watching her with wide, knowing eyes. That night, the tension in the house shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something hotter, something dangerous. The dinner was a disaster of tension masquerading as a meal. The dining room table was long enough to seat 20, but only 4 people were seated. Davies sat at the head. Sarah sat to his right, Bella to his left. And at the opposite end sat Lorenzo. Lorenzo was the opposite of Davies. Where Davies was cold, controlled, and dark, Lorenzo was golden, smiling and frantic. He wore a white suit and smiled too much. So, Lorenzo said, slicing into his steak with surgical precision. This is the famous waitress, the savior of the Moretti heir. Her name is Sarah, Davies said, not looking up from his plate. Sarah. Lorenzo purred. He lifted his wine glass. You've done a miracle. Bella looks alive. We were all beginning to worry she was broken beyond repair. She's a child, not a watch, Sarah snapped. She instantly regretted it, gripping her fork tight. Lorenzo's smile widened, but his eyes remained dead. Feisty. I like that. Davies always did like them with a bit of fire. His late wife was the same way. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Davies slowly placed his knife and fork down. The clink echoed like a gunshot. Do not speak of her, Lorenzo, Davies said softly. The threat was unmistakable. Just reminiscing, boss, Lorenzo said, raising his hands in mock surrender. I'm just saying it's good to see you moving on, replacing the old pieces. Sarah is an employee, Davies stated. Is she? Lorenzo looked between them. Because the way you look at her, it doesn't look like you're thinking about her W-2 forms. Lorenzo turned his gaze to Sarah. Be careful, sweetheart. The last woman who sat in that chair ended up in a closed casket. It's a dangerous position. Being the boss's favorite creates jealousy. That's enough. Davies stood up. Dinner is over. Sarah, take Bella upstairs. Sarah scrambled to get Bella out of the chair. As she ushered the girl toward the double doors, Lorenzo called out one last thing. The winter gala is this Saturday, Sarah. You should come. I'd love to have a dance. See if you move as well as you speak. Sarah didn't look back. She rushed Bella to her room, her hands shaking as she helped the girl into her pajamas. Later that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The house felt oppressive. She put on a silk robe, another gift from Davies that she hadn't asked for, and went down to the kitchen for water. As she passed the study, she heard voices. The door was cracked open. He has to go, Davies. He's making moves in the south side. He's meeting with the Russians. It was Luca Davies's head of security. I know. Davies's voice was weary. But I can't touch him yet. He has half the capos loyal to him. If I kill Lorenzo now, I start a civil war within the family. I need proof." "He threatened the girl tonight," Luca said. "And he threatened the woman. If he touches a hair on Sarah's head—" Davies's voice dropped to a growl that made Sarah's knees weak. "I will burn this city to the ground to find him. She is not to be touched. Put a detail on her. 24/7. "You care about her, Dom," Luca said. "I can't afford to care," Davies replied. "Caring makes you predictable. Caring gets people killed." Sarah backed away silently, her heart racing. He cared, but he was pushing her away to protect her. Saturday, the winter gala. Sarah tried to refuse to go. Davies wouldn't hear of it. "Lorenzo challenged you," Davies said as he adjusted his cufflinks in the foyer. "If you don't show up, he wins. He thinks you're weak. In this world, you cannot show fear." "I'm afraid," Sarah argued. "I'm a waitress. I serve burgers. I don't dodge bullets. Tonight, you are not a waitress." Davies turned to her. He signaled to the maid who brought out a garment bag. "Tonight, you are mine." Sarah opened the bag. Inside was a dress of deep blood-red velvet. It was strapless, fitted with a slit that went up to her thigh. It was elegant, bold, and undeniably aggressive. "Red," Davies said, stepping close to her. "The color of power. Wear it like armor." When Sarah walked into the ballroom of the Drake Hotel 2 hours later, the room went silent. She was stunning. The red dress contrasted perfectly with her pale skin and dark hair. She held her head high, gripping Davies's arm. Davies leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Breathe. You're doing fine. Just don't let go of me." "I wasn't planning on it," she whispered back. The night was a blur of champagne-heavy stares and forced smiles. Lorenzo was there, watching from the shadows like a viper. Around midnight, Davies was pulled away by a senator. Sarah was left alone near the ice sculpture. "You clean up nice," a voice hissed. Sarah turned. Lorenzo was there. He smelled of gin and malice. "Where's the coat?" he asked, stepping into her personal space. "The magic coat that saved the princess. It's with Bella," Sarah said, looking around for a guard. "You know," Lorenzo whispered, "Davies is weak. He thinks he can run the Mafia with morals. He thinks he can play house with a stray cat like you. But winter is coming, Sarah, and coats, they burn very easily." Before Sarah could respond, Lorenzo pressed something into her hand. A bullet. A souvenir. He smiled. "Give my regards to the boss." He walked away. Sarah stood there, trembling, clutching the cold metal slug. She found Davies minutes later. "We need to leave. Now." Davies saw the look in her eyes. He didn't ask questions. He grabbed her hand and signaled Luca. "Car, now!" They exited through the back, hurrying into the armored limousine. "What happened?" Davies demanded, as the car sped onto Lakeshore Drive. The snow was falling heavily again, just like the night they met. Sarah opened her hand to reveal the bullet. Davies's face went white, then red with rage. "He gave you this. He said coats burn easily," Sarah sobbed. "Davies, he's going to hurt Bella." "Over my dead body," Davies swore. Suddenly the car swerved violently. Crash! An explosion rocked the vehicle. The limousine spun out of control on the icy highway, slamming into the concrete divider. The window's bulletproof glass spider-webbed but held. "Get down!" Davies roared. He tackled Sarah, covering her body with his own, as the car flipped onto its side. Sparks showered them. The smell of gasoline filled the cabin. Sarah was screaming, pinned beneath Davies's massive weight. "Are you hurt?" Davies yelled, his face inches from hers. Blood was trickling down his forehead. "No, I don't think so," Sarah gasped. "Listen to me." Davies grabbed her face. Outside, gunfire erupted. Rat-tat-tat-tat. "We have been ambushed. My men are fighting, but we are pinned." He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a gun. He checked the clip. "I need you to trust me, Sarah. Can you do that?" "Yes," she wept. "We have to crawl out. The gas tank is ruptured, Ethan. If we stay, we burn." Davies kicked the shattered windshield until it gave way. He dragged Sarah out into the freezing snow. The wind howled, mixing with the sounds of shouting and gunfire. 3 men in ski masks were advancing on the wreck. Davies fired 2 shots. 2 bodies dropped. He was a marksman. "Run," he commanded, grabbing her hand. They ran toward the barrier of the bridge. Below them was the frozen Chicago River. Behind them, more men were coming. "We can't outrun them," Sarah yelled. Davies looked at the approaching gunman, then at the frozen river, 30 feet below. "Do you trust me?" he asked again. "Yes." "Take a deep breath." Davies wrapped his arms around her, shielding her head, and jumped. They fell through the darkness, hitting the ice and snow below with a bone-shattering crunch. The impact knocked the wind out of Sarah, and the world went black. Pain. That was the first thing Sarah felt, a dull, throbbing ache in her shoulder. Then the cold. She opened her eyes. White. Everything was white. She was lying on a shelf of ice under the bridge. Above her, the twisted wreckage of the limousine was burning on the highway, casting an eerie orange glow against the falling snow. Sarah. A hand grabbed her arm. It was Davies. He was dragging himself toward her. His face was a mask of blood, and he was favoring his left leg heavily. His impeccable tuxedo was shredded, and his overcoat was gone, lost in the fall. "Are you alive?" he gritted out, his voice strained. I think so," Sarah gasped, sitting up. Her body screamed in protest, but nothing seemed broken. The snow had cushioned their fall, and the slope of the frozen riverbank had allowed them to slide rather than shatter. "We have to move," Davies said. "They will come down to check the bodies. We need cover." He tried to stand, but his leg buckled. He let out a guttural roar of pain. "Lean on me," Sarah said, adrenaline surging through her veins. She scrambled up and wedged her shoulder under his arm. Together, they hobbled into the darkness under the bridge. The wind was a physical weight pushing against them. Sarah spotted a dilapidated maintenance shed used by the city workers for the river locks. It was chained shut. Davies didn't hesitate. He raised his gun and fired a single shot at the lock. It shattered. They stumbled inside. It was freezing, smelling of rust and oil, but it was out of the wind. Sarah kicked the door shut and shoved a heavy workbench against it. She turned to Davies. He had slid down the wall to the concrete floor. His skin was pale, his lips turning blue. The adrenaline was wearing off, and shock was setting in. "You're freezing," Sarah whispered. She knelt beside him. "Davies, you're going into shock." "My leg," he rasped. "Broken." Sarah looked. His pant leg was soaked in blood. She didn't have a medkit. She didn't have a phone. She didn't have her coat. She had left it with Bella. "We need heat," Davies murmured, his eyes fluttering shut. If we sleep, we don't wake up. Sarah looked around. There was nothing to burn. No heater. The temperature was dropping to 30 below. She remembered what they taught in survival shows. Skin to skin. Davies, listen to me, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I'm going to keep you warm, but you have to stay awake. She unzipped the back of her ruined velvet dress. She helped Davies out of his shredded jacket and shirt. His chest was bruised, covered in tattoos of old battles, but it was ice cold to the touch. Sarah wrapped herself around him, pulling the remains of his jacket over both of them like a blanket. She pressed her chest against his, her legs intertwining with his good leg. She became a human furnace, transferring every ounce of her body heat to him. Sarah, he breathed, his head resting on her shoulder. The intimacy was overwhelming, born of desperation. I'm here, she whispered, stroking his hair. I've got at you. For hours they lay there in the dark. To keep him awake, Sarah made him talk. Why did you hire me? She asked. Really? Davies's voice was weak, vibrating against her chest. Because you gave it away. The coat. The coat. He agreed. In my world, everyone takes. Everyone wants something. Power. Money. Protection. You had nothing, and you gave away your only shield to a stranger. I had to know if you were real. I had to know if goodness still existed. He turned his head slightly, his nose brushing against her neck. I didn't just hire you for Bella. He confessed, his voice barely audible. I wanted to be near you. I wanted to see if your warmth could thaw me out, too. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Did it work? Davies lifted his head. His eyes, usually so cold, were burning with a feverish intensity. I am burning up, Sarah. He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was desperate tasting of blood and survival. Sarah kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope into it. In that freezing shed, with death waiting outside the door, they clung to each other as if they were the only two people on earth. We survived this, Davies whispered against her lips. And when we do, I am never letting you go. Deal. Sarah wept. Morning came slowly. The storm broke. At 7:00 a.m., the sound of a helicopter woke them. Not a police chopper. A black military-grade transport. The door to the shed was kicked in. Sarah screamed, shielding Davies. Boss, it was Luca, and behind him, a dozen armed men. We found the heat signature, Luca yelled. Medics now. As they loaded Davies onto the stretcher, he grabbed Luca's jacket. Lorenzo, Davies demanded. He thinks you're dead, Luca said grimly. He's at the estate. He's called a meeting of the capos. He's taking over. And Bella, Sarah cried out. Luca hesitated. He has her. He's keeping her in the library. He says he's protecting the heir. Davies's face went deadly calm. The pain seemed to vanish, replaced by pure, undistilled rage. Get me a splint, Davies ordered, and get me a gun. Boss, you need a hospital, the medic argued. I said, Davies snarled, sitting up and ripping the IV out of his arm. Get me a gun. We are going home. The library of the Moretti estate was a cathedral of silence and shadow. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that hadn't been opened in decades. In the center of the room, the massive mahogany desk, Davies's desk, sat like a throne. And tonight, a usurper sat upon it. Lorenzo poured himself a glass of Davies's rarest scotch, a 30-year-old single malt that Davies saved for the birth of his children. Lorenzo didn't savor it. He gulped it down like water, the amber liquid splashing against his lips. He slammed the crystal glass down on the desk, the sound echoing like a gavel strike. Around the room sat the 5 capitans, the heads of the distinct crews that made up the Moretti crime family. They were hard men, scarred and weary, wearing ill-fitting suits and expressions of deep suspicion. They looked at Lorenzo, and then they looked at each other. "It is a tragedy." Lorenzo began, his voice dripping with a rehearsed, oily sorrow. He stood up and walked around the desk, commanding the room. "A freak accident. The roads were icy. The visibility was zero. We have lost a great leader." Devise was a visionary. A visionary who had excellent drivers, grunted Capo Rossi, a heavy-set man with a thick grey moustache. He didn't touch the drink Lorenzo had poured him. "Davies never travelled without a convoy. You're telling us he went off the road in a secure limo, and his security detail just vanished." Lorenzo's smile didn't waver, but his eyes tightened. "The police report says the car skidded on black ice near the bridge. It went over the rail. An explosion followed. The gas tank. It's a terrible way to go." "And the girl?" Rossi asked, nodding toward the corner of the room. Lorenzo glanced over. In the far corner, almost blending into the shadows of the heavy velvet drapes, sat Bella. She was perched on a high-backed leather chair that swallowed her small frame. She was wrapped in that ridiculous, oversized, camel-colored wool coat, the waitress's coat. It was dirty, stained with soot from the fireplace she had been huddled near earlier, but she clutched it around herself like a suit of armor. She was staring at the floor, swinging her legs slightly. She looked catatonic. "Bella is fragile." Lorenzo sighed, walking over to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Bella flinched violently, shrinking deeper into the wool. "The shock has been too much for her. As underboss, the burden of leadership falls to me. I will raise the girl as my own. I will protect her. She is the heir, after all. Her safety legitimizes my transition." "Transition?" another capo asked. "We haven't even seen a body, Lorenzo." "The river is frozen, and the car burned, gentlemen." Lorenzo snapped, his patience fraying. "There are no bodies to find, just ash. We need to move on. The Russians are pressing on the south side. We cannot afford a power vacuum. I am taking the chair. Tonight." The room went deadly silent. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the unsaid accusation that everyone was thinking, but was too afraid to voice. "Wait." The word was soft, barely a whisper, but in the heavy silence it sounded like a scream. Every head turned. Lorenzo looked down. Bella had stopped swinging her legs. She slid off the massive chair, her small boots hitting the Persian rug with a thud. She stood up, drowning in the camel coat, the sleeves covering her hands completely. She looked up at Lorenzo. Her dark eyes, usually so empty and sad, were burning with a terrifying clarity. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Lorenzo asked, his voice dropping to a menacing purr. "Go back to your coloring book." "You didn't lose him," Bella said. Her voice was steady, louder this time. It wasn't the voice of a child. It was the voice of a Moretti. "You killed him." A ripple of shock went through the capitanes. Capo Rossi leaned forward. Lorenzo let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Gentlemen, please. The poor child is delusional with grief. She's traumatized." "I have proof," Bella said. Lorenzo's smile vanished. "Proof? What proof could you possibly have, you mute little brat?" Bella reached into the deep, cavernous pocket of the camel coat. It was the pocket where Sarah used to keep her notepad and tips. Now it held something else. Bella pulled out a small black rectangle. It was a digital voice recorder, the kind Davies used for dictating memos. "We play a game," Bella said, addressing the room of hardened killers. "Hide and seek. I'm very good at hiding. I was hiding in the vent in your office yesterday, Lorenzo, when you were on the phone." Lorenzo's face drained of color. He lunged for her. "Give me that." Bella was small, but she was quick. She stepped back and pressed the central button with her thumb. Click. Lorenzo's voice, tinny and distorted, but undeniably his, filled the cavernous library. "Yes, cut the brake lines. Do it tonight. And put the bomb under the chassis just in case the crash doesn't finish the job." The recording continued silence, stretching in the room as Lorenzo's digital voice laughed. "Make sure the girl is untouched. I need her for legitimacy. But kill Davies, and kill the waitress. Burn them. I want no loose ends." Click. Bella stopped the recording. She looked at Capo Rossi. "He is the snake," Bella said simply. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It went from a business meeting to a tribunal. The capitans stood up, hands drifting toward the bulges under their jackets. "It's a fake," Lorenzo screamed, backing away toward the desk, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "Technology deep fakes. The brat doctored it. She hates me because I tried to discipline her." "Sit down, Lorenzo." Capo Rossi growled, his hand now resting openly on his pistol grip. "No." Lorenzo roared. Panic had taken the wheel. He drew his weapon, a silver-plated 9mm, and pointed it not at the men, but at the child. "Back off!" Lorenzo shrieked, grabbing Bella by the collar of the coat and hauling her in front of him. She cried out, her feet dangling off the floor. He pressed the barrel of the gun to her temple. "I walk out of here, or the girl dies. I end the Moretti line right here on the rug." The capitanes froze. They couldn't shoot. The girl was the golden goose. "Open the doors," Lorenzo yelled. "Get my car, now!" Boom! The double oak doors to the library didn't open. They shattered. The lock mechanism disintegrated in a shower of wood splinters and brass as a heavy boot kicked through the center. The doors swung violently inward, slamming against the walls. In the swirling dust and smoke of the entryway, a figure stood. It was a nightmare given flesh. Davies Moretti leaned heavily against the doorframe, but he was standing. His face was a map of violence, blood caked in his hairline, a gash across his cheek, his skin grey with cold and shock. His tuxedo pants were shredded, revealing a leg wrapped tightly in duct tape and jagged pieces of wood acting as a splint. But his eyes were two blue flames of pure, unadulterated murder. Supported under his left arm was Sarah. She looked just as battered, her once glamorous red velvet dress torn and stained with grease and blood. She was trembling from exhaustion, essentially holding Davies upright, but her jaw was set in a line of fierce determination. Behind them stood Luca and a wall of loyal enforcers. "Put her down," Davies rasped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. Lorenzo's eyes bulged. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "Dom, I saw the fire. You're dead." "Not yet," Davies said. He took a step forward. He limped, dragging the broken leg, a low growl of pain escaping his throat, but he didn't stop. "I said put my daughter down. Stay back." Lorenzo tightened his grip on Bella. The little girl was sobbing now, terrifyingly silent tears running down her cheeks. "I'll kill her. I swear to God. Dom, I'll paint the walls with her." Davies raised his right hand. He was holding a heavy black Sig Sauer. His hand was shaking tremors of hypothermia and blood loss. But he leveled it at Lorenzo's head. "If you hurt her," Davies whispered, the sound carrying across the room, "death will be a luxury you cannot afford." "You can't make the shot," Lorenzo yelled, hysterical. "Look at you. You can barely stand. You're shaking. You'll hit the kid." He was right. Davies was fading. Sarah could feel his weight increasing on her shoulder. He was running on fumes. If he missed, if his hand spasmed, Bella would die. Sarah looked at Lorenzo. She looked at the gun pressed to the little girl's head. She looked at the coat Bella was wearing, her coat. Something snapped inside Sarah. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, white-hot anger. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was a protector. She saw a heavy crystal decanter on a side table to her right. "Davies," Sarah whispered. "Trust me." Davies's eyes flicked to her for a millisecond. He understood. Sarah lunged away from Davies. Without his support, he staggered, dropping to one knee. Lorenzo saw Davies fall and laughed triumphantly, shifting his aim toward the fallen Don. "Goodbye, Dom." That was his mistake. With a scream of primal rage, Sarah grabbed the heavy crystal decanter and hurled it with every ounce of strength she possessed. It wasn't a perfect throw, but it was enough. The heavy crystal smashed into Lorenzo's elbow with a sickening crunch. Lorenzo howled, his arm jerking involuntarily. The gun discharged, bang, but the shot went wide, shattering the window behind the desk. "Now!" Sarah screamed. Davies didn't need to be told. From his knee, he steadied his gun with both hands. The shaking stopped for one singular heartbeat. He exhaled. Bang! The shot was thunderous in the enclosed space. Lorenzo jerked backward as if kicked by an invisible mule. A neat, dark hole appeared in the center of his forehead. The look of surprise was frozen on his face forever. He collapsed backward into Davies's chair, dead before he slumped to the floor. Silence crashed back into the room. It was absolute. Bella scrambled away from the body. She stood in the center of the room, trembling. Davies dropped his gun. The adrenaline vanished, and the pain came rushing back like a tidal wave. He slumped forward, unable to rise. "Papa!" Bella ran. She hit him at full speed, burying her face in his chest, her small hands clutching his torn shirt. "I've got—" Davies gasped, wrapping his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. He kissed the top of her head repeatedly, checking her for injuries. "I've got to you, Bella. I'm here. It's over." The Capitans slowly holstered their weapons. Capo Rossi walked over to Lorenzo's body, looked at it, and then turned to Davies. He bowed his head low, a silent reaffirmation of loyalty. Then he signaled the others. They filed out of the room, dragging Lorenzo's body with them, leaving the family alone. Sarah stood by the overturned table, her chest heaving. She felt lightheaded. The room was spinning. Davies looked up from the floor. His face was streaked with tears and blood. He extended a hand toward her. "Sarah." She walked toward them, her legs feeling like lead. She collapsed onto the rug beside them. Davies reached out and pulled her into the embrace. It wasn't a romantic hug. It was a desperate tangle of limbs, a pile of survivors checking to see if they were still whole. Bella pulled back slightly. She opened the left side of the camel coat, Sarah's coat, that was still wrapped around her. She grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her inside the wool, then grabbed Davies's hand and pulled it in too. "Warm," Bella whispered, her voice cracking. Sarah looked at the little girl, then at Davies. Davies looked at Sarah with an intensity that burned hotter than the fire. There were no walls left between them. No boss and employee. No rich and poor. Just three people who had walked through hell and come out the other side together. "Yes," Davies whispered, leaning his forehead against Sarah's, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Finally warm." As the snow continued to fall outside the shattered window, burying the world in white, the three of them sat on the rug, wrapped in a cheap wool coat that was worth more than the entire estate. They were safe. They were together. And for the first time in a very long time, the house didn't feel cold anymore. And that is how a $3 bank account and a single act of kindness toppled a mafia empire. Sarah didn't just save a little girl from the snow. She thawed the heart of a monster and found a family in the process. It proves that sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a gun. It's a warm coat given freely in the freezing cold.